Our first speaker was born in Seoul. In 1994, he founded BCHO Partners, a 40-people firm focused on simple structures and a strong regard for nature. He has received the Kia Award, Cree Arc Award, and AIA Honor Awards in Montana chapter and the Northwest and Pacific region. He has taught at national and international universities including Aarhus School of Architecture, University Kaiserslautern, Yonsei, Hanyang, Byungji, and Harvard University. His award-winning projects include the Earth House, the Concrete Box House, the Jeepjong Guest House, Hyundai Global Training Center, the Ramp Building, and the Bitrix Building. Amazing projects which won't be the topic of his talk today. We are very excited to have him participating today. Welcome, Cho Byung-soo.
Hi, how are you? This is Byung-jo from Seoul, Korea. I am very glad to meet you today through ANA, Architects, not Architects, Architecture Forum program. I'm really happy tonight, especially since Incheol Kim, the architect that I respect the most, is joining us after me today, and have an opportunity to discuss and share our thoughts. So I guess I will start soon with these projects and try to finish this entire thing in about 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, brief overview of the things that I like, then I like to give a quick tour of my office in about 1 minute after that. Okay, so things that I like, through the things that I like, probably you can imagine what is me, Byung-jo, is actually, and how I make architecture such a way. I'm from South Korea. I was born in Seoul, Korea, just the north side of the river. Gangnam, as you might know, is the south part of the river, and north side of the river, Seoul, is more mountainous and more historical buildings. And to me, it's more interesting and have a lot of this culture. Korea is really mountainous country. About 60 to 70% of the entire land is composed of this kind of mountains. And I was grown up in Korea till about very early 20s. And then I went to United States to study architecture. And I went to Montana State University, which is located in Bozeman, Montana, a small town in Montana. The small image that you see on the screen is agricultural building. As you can see, it's agricultural buildings built with real honesty, with a simple, humble material, and very economical way. And this kind of aerial view of Montana State University and Bozeman, Montana, as you can see, is really mountainous area. Also, it's Rocky Mountains. The university is full-size university, but relatively small. Now, a little over 10,000 students, and entire towns about 60,000 people. I spent here about 4 years in the college, and then I went there to teach in the university for about another 7 years, and I keep going and coming here. And so Bozeman is like my second hometown. And of course, I've been strongly influenced by not only Korean culture and architecture, but also wild Western American architecture, especially old agricultural buildings, industrial buildings, and very early stage concrete buildings. This is about 150 years old prison in small town called Red Lodge, Montana. And you can see rough concrete and wooden window frames and doors, which was set before pouring the concrete. I like the way it's constructed and the way it looks. Very simple. And these are agricultural buildings and industrial buildings around Bozeman. This one actually is in Bozeman. And there are many barns. Unlike barns in eastern side of United States or England or Europe, if you go western side of US, you can see very simple, really efficiently built. You can see these small members of material, and with a really minimum amount of material, building maximum kind of volumes. So it looks very good in that way, and I really like these kind of agricultural buildings in their ways, and influenced my architecture. And I brought these to show students in US as well as in Korea. And these are the structures still remaining around the university that I spent for many years. And when I came back to Korea about 27 years ago, after Montana State University, I studied at Harvard University, spent in Boston about 7 years, which was very different from Montana. So it had more European kind of influence there. And I returned back to Korea, and I was wondering what kind of architecture I could do. But what I found in Korea was kind of emptiness, the beauty of emptiness in Korea, byum, or mak, kind of mundane, kind of roughly unfinished kind of look. And I was fascinated by that kind of heritage of Korean culture and architecture. And I was fascinated. And this is one of the buildings I designed, the concrete box house. It has kind of void space. And I just fell in love with this kind of empty madang or courtyard space in Korean traditional architecture, and this reflects some of that qualities. The relationship to nature, since I really like nature, and when I was growing up in Korea, even though I was growing up in Seoul, I was growing up in edge of Seoul, still had more natural kind of environment kept well till then, 60s and 70s. And I could appreciate, and so when I started my architecture, I found myself really, I like nature, and always when I design, I think about nature and how to connect human experience to nature was a big thing in architecture. For example, sometimes I embedded the building underground, and I like poet Dongju Yoon, who died when he was only 27. It's a beautiful poem, and I read poems. I do ceremonies with poem readings and forums, and with my employees. This is a picture taken only a few months ago, at the end of last summer. We discuss about the quality of Korean culture, aspect of Bium and Mak, which is like kind of unfinished kind of aesthetic of Korean culture, Korean art and architecture. And I often to talk and do exhibitions about it and try to learn from past and try to learn from our contemporary cultures, but also what we do in our office, and we discuss and share these kind of ideas. And I'm pretty fortunate that my brother, one of my brother, is a builder. So he actually worked in my office, and he built a construction company, CNO construction company. And so we talk a lot about architecture, construction, material, methods, and all these things. And so that's kind of my background and really quick review of my past life till about 10 years ago. A little over 10 years ago, I built my own house, and this is the house I live. I thought you might have interest to see my house quickly. So she's my wife. This picture taken about 13 years ago. And even though we live in downtown Seoul, we found the area with some trees and hills. There's better breeze and sunlight. And in the house, in one of the room, we made a small, cozy Korea-style house with rice paper doors and windows. And we often sit down there together and closely in small space, have teas and sometimes take a nap and meditate. And Bium, I'm sure it exists, Bium, literally saying, you can say emptiness, that kind of exists in every culture, I think. But for example, Japanese emptiness is more like perfectly balanced, very well developed, very well defined. But Korean Bium is more like before it's fully finished, it's just stopped and naturally left somewhat. Not easy to explain in short time, but I've been influenced a lot about it, and I've been influenced also a lot about Taoism. And Tao, they can be told, is not the eternal Tao, and many beautiful poems in chapters in the teaching. And this was one of my thesis model that I made for my master's degree at Harvard. And I was thinking about what would be the minimum space or minimum thing, minimum way of living. And this was what I made. Of course, it influenced my architecture and thinkings later, and this kind of current projects, sketches. And when I came to Korea, I was really shocked by some traditional buildings in Korea when I visited some historical site. Famous Confucius teacher Yi Huang lived in small room, and in the room there was small just coat hanger and few books and small table. That's all he owned in his life. And the way of living was almost empty. So his room was empty also. The room is so small, but when you walk in, it kind of helps you to keep yourself really calm and peaceful. So I was really fascinated by that kind of architecture. And this earth house I made, and you can see the influence there, very quiet, small rooms. And I'll go over with mock aesthetic of mock that I like also, kind of unfinished stages. So it shows how it's made, how fast it's made. So it shows all the marks made by hand, making it so quickly. So, and this glaze also is not perfectly covered often, but naturally left like that. So it's not totally symmetrical. Sometimes it's a little bit tilted, twisted, but it has its own natural beauty that I named it mock. Mock means spontaneously made, something like that. And this is a small garden I like. And this Helen Bennett's photograph, English photographer. And this book is going to come out in March. And I got these images from Amazon. And she has been in Korea a very short period of time, but she caught that beauty of these spontaneously made materials and architecture and kind of roughness, kind of unfinished, kind of aesthetic, but really pure, humble, really limited color use in architecture and kind of minimal way of using materials, colors, the way it connects to the surrounding nature is really organic and beautiful, not as symmetrical as Chinese architecture or Japanese architecture, but it's very sequentially laid out and following mountains and hillside and pretty spontaneously located, site planned. And as you can see, these axes often tilt, and the process of one space to another is very interesting in that way. As you can see in the columns and column base, you can see materials really naturally used. And similar architecture exists, for example, in English agricultural buildings in German, but definitely somewhat different. And Koreans used it more naturally, spontaneously, kind of unfinished ways, less planned ahead, kind of. And some paintings reflect their kind of aesthetics with a few touches of brush strokes. It expresses nature and architecture and what is beautiful. And contemporary, from contemporary artist works, you can find that kind of pure and the beauty, but as you can see in boundaries of this painting, for example, spontaneously, naturally, just smeared into the canvas. And in pencil drawings over oil, spontaneously just went over and over, and humble and kind of unfinished kind of look. And some of my early brush stroke paintings on poem books. And this apple box, I wrote a few articles on apple box, the simplicity of apple box, and the relationship of the rough, unfinished kind of look to the clean glass. That's the special glass that you use for cell phones, and try to see the relationships to one to another. So those are current work of mine. And this concrete box house, we've been demolished this inside currently to see more primitive, simple look of the building. And this my neighbor building here, we are thinking about making exhibition space inside, keeping these existing buildings somehow, and try to add few very clean different material. And this, like today's meetings was about this exhibition space and things like that. I can show you today of almost 10 minutes. So I'll show you around my office space. So I will give you a quick tour of my office. Excuse me a second. Okay, I hope you can see well my office where I was sitting and where I'm paintings and sketches, trying to get some inspirations for architecture. And these are some of my early works and student works. I was always curious about nature, life and death, and monoprint types and skulls. And this is my favorite desk. I'm sitting and looking out. Oh, it's snowing a little bit.
Ist noch da?
Okay. I see. I wonder if you can see the snow a little bit, but there's mountain and the context neighbors. Okay, so this is about picture, some apple boxes and some sketches on the wall, and my wife sitting next to me. Okay. That's about the tour. I hope you liked it. I hope, and that's all the presentation I give you today. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you a lot for your presentation and also for the tour. It was very funny to see your wife. So greetings from our team, please.
Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned in your talk, first of all, of course, I think you say that in your early 20s you went to USA, but you also have experience teaching in other countries like Germany. How has studying and teaching in other countries influenced the way you design?
Well, actually, yes, I taught in different countries. I taught in Germany, United States, Denmark, of course in Korea. I learned different things from different culture. I think I learned more from culture than architecture itself. Germany, I learned they really have great respect to nature. And I was really fascinated by that. But also, at the same time, I find people like very precise way of making and precisely planned ahead. And compared to United States or Denmark, sometimes less flexible, but very accurate and permanent, which I learned a lot from, but I thought that is not going to be the way I'm making architecture, because that sometimes a little bit too much time consuming or material taking, labor taking. I had more interest in more sustainable way of making architecture and way of using. So for from different culture, I think I learned different things.
It will be very interesting. Maybe this is a topic for the roundtable discussion with Kim to talk about what we can learn from Korean culture for other countries, as since our audience is international today. You have mentioned during your talk the topic emptiness, and I have seen an interview where you say that beauty is a result of emptiness, and that is possible to see it. It is possible to see it only when we empty ourselves. Can you? What do you mean by that? Can you explain that a little bit?
For example, I showed you Yi Huang's, one of the Confucius teachers who lived about 500 years ago. The room is so simple and not much furniture even there. And he didn't own many things. So he was kind of an empty person. So he could appreciate that room, and he can just possess nothing, but so he could concentrate reading books and meditate and appreciate the emptiness that way. So when I design some buildings, I talk to my clients, and of course they own a lot of things today, contemporary livings, everybody does, but I try to talk to them, what they want and how we can live. And when I show different ways of living with much simple and less, often I find my clients really appreciate it and enjoy it. And that's the thing I mean, I guess.
That's very nice. But how do you find emptiness living in a crowded city, for example, in Seoul?
Well, like Miss Van der Rohe designed gallery, German gallery in Berlin. And he was influenced by Nietzsche's, Friedrich Nietzsche's, philosopher Nietzsche's. He said, someday the city will be so crowded and we would need some place then that we can just go in and relax. And he made, Miss Van der Rohe made a gallery so empty and simple. And in contemporary societies and buildings, it is very difficult sometimes, but even some small space, even in some small space, you can make, like, for example, like the room I showed you in my house, Korea style room. The room does not have to be large. The space can be very small, but simple and nothing in it. So you can go and sit down and really relax. It's like a pause. So pause in space somehow, and small pause. So that's, I find sometimes possible making room like that, or give some different ground level changes so you can really sit down and relax. It could be another way, and I guess different architects can find different ways of making it.
That's very interesting. Actually, also one topic you mentioned is the appreciation and respect for the existing and the past. Where is this deep appreciation for the past is coming?
Past already have its own beauty, I think. The things past is, to me, look all beautiful, especially the old ones, especially ruins, So I've been fascinated by adaptive use buildings and structures, and past have all the memories and recyclable values, everything's. So we did a couple projects with a slogan that we are going to recycle 100% whatever existing there for adaptive use picture. So historical things past have all the values there and all the reasons there open. And I think it's beautiful already as it is. So it needs respect, I think. So when we add some things to that old buildings or historical buildings, it should be something different or light, or at least some distinguishable kind of object in that existing building or historical buildings, I believe.
Your work is very related to Taoist ideas, for example, about negative and positive spaces. Which Taoist ideas have a deeper influence on you as a person, not only as an architect?
Oh, that's amazing. You're asking really good, important questions. I guess
take your time.
I really studied a lot, but well, my thesis project at Harvard addressed like 7 different poems I selected and used it. But if someone asked me to select only one, I would say there is one very simple poem, one of the chapter in Taoism, Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu, 500 BC. The chapter is this: unborn, so ever living. In Korean words, 태어나지 않은, 그래서 영원히 사는. If you are born, you have life. It's like a sun. Sun has a life. Someday will disappear. And bird or clouds that changes and moves and is very active, energetic. But earth is unborn, so ever living. So because it's not born, it's not going to die. But it birth things, still it birth things. But even though it is not born by itself, so negative, the earth is stronger than active things. Maybe that's the reason I like earth. It's really simple, quiet. I like mountains. I like ocean views, beautiful skies, beautiful watercolor. But I really like the ocean at night, dark ocean that you barely see the horizon. That's, to me, is very beautiful. So, unborn, ever living is one of the poems in Tao Te Ching.
That is really nice, and also very nice closing words for the interview.
Okay.
I would like to say thank you for your talk and for this interview. We will talk later during the roundtable discussion. Now we are going to introduce Kim. Thank you, Cho. Thank you for your time. See you later.
Thank you. See you soon. Yeah.
Our second speaker was born in Jinhe. In 1986, he established his own practice, Inje Architects, which was later renamed Archeum. He's a national legend and an important figure in Korean architecture for several generations. He has worked as a professor at Yunnan University, was member of the Presidential Commission on Architecture Policy, and currently holds the position of city architect for the Busan metropolitan area. His long list of relevant works has been honored with multiple awards of the Korean Institute of Architects, the Kim Soo-jung Architecture Award, and the Seoul Architecture Award for projects like Kim Ok-jil Memorial Hall, the headquarters for Wongjin Think Big, Urban Hive, and many more. As he doesn't speak English, we recorded his talk a few days ago so that you can enjoy it with an English voiceover. However, the interview and the roundtable discussion will be live since we will have an interpreter. We are very honored to have him participating today. Welcome, Kim In-chol.
Hi, it's very nice to meet you here. I am the Korean architect Kim In-chol. Today, to tell my life story, I wish to start in a fun and a very light way. In order to understand Korean architecture and its architect, there should be some background info. So, I am gonna start with something very important to me. The picture you see on the screen, pictures at left, shows the city of Seoul 10 years prior to my birth. The picture on the right shows the city of Seoul 10 years afterwards, where it was devastated by Korean War. To look at the city of Seoul 10 years before, we can see Korean traditional architectures coexist with the Western ones. At the time, the Western architectures, they came via Japan. So Korea became aware of the modern architectures very little by little. And that didn't work out very well because we experienced catastrophic Korean War that destroyed all the cities and its buildings. Architecture is said to be the proof that expresses the era, and when it comes to recovery from Korean War, we never had a chance to learn modern architectures in order. We had to build in quantity rather than quality when it's needed. I think this might be the Korean modernism that makes Korean architecture. For your easy understanding, we'll compare by this chart. The purple is the history of Western architecture development, and underneath, the green is the flow of Korean history. Green is thought to be the traditional era, and when it closes to 2000, it is the time when we begin our modern architectures. Nearly at very last, the time when Korea was established, and my age, they come very similar. So to view in this way, it is right to say history of Korean modern architecture that comes along with my architectural life. I was born in the city of Seoul. Soon, I moved to the southern port city of Jinhae, and I grew up there. The place I lived was Japanese style of wooden 2 stories building. In this space, I studied and I lived. All those kind of things later to me became very helpful to get a sense of space. I'm quite sure that they became my architectural DNA. Important thing is that personally I was not able to know our traditions at very first. What I experienced at first was other countries' cultures. Then later, I was able to come back to my own tradition. Through architecture, to find out more how images of cities, spaces, locations, and many other things were shaped will play very important role. When I went to high school in Busan, the unique thing was there was a round-shaped building at the time. Classrooms were fan-shaped. It was very unstructured. At the time, I was not really interested in architectures. Although I never felt it directly, it was very helpful to be more flexible and be able to get rid of all the stereotypes on spaces and structures. When time came for the university and decide what to do, I thought of being an artist because I was good at it. At the end, my families were against it. They wanted me to have a stable job, so I quit art and selected architecture. One of my elder friends at school said to me, architecture was constructing a masterpiece on land. When I heard that, I applied for architecture. And then I completed military service. Then I had 7 years to study architecture. A few years later, I graduated. And in my university time, the significant memory that stays in my mind when studying architecture was the year back in 1965 when I first entered university. I recall the time then. The overall atmosphere in school was very down and very low by the death of Corbusier. I didn't know who he was exactly back in 1965. What I had in my mind was people in different countries could feel so sad by the death of foreign architect. I thought this could be the very last aim for an architect. Anyway, how to make and how to think, how to express practically, they were very interesting works for me. And upon the graduation, when to graduate, I focused on to be the architect only rather than seeking for other jobs. During my university years, I was with Mr. John Dong-hoon and Mr. Om-Dap-moon, who were my elder students and mentors. They ran architect office, and I joined in, learned all the practical works about the architecture. Then, my concern on architecture was a series of how-to problems, such as how to architect and how to build. What I learned at that time, they were very important for me. While working at the office, I had chance to visit Japan. I had been to many places in Japan. I stopped by city of Kurashiki, where the city was built for foreign trade. The city was about 100 years old. I was clearly in the foreign city of Japan. Surprisingly, I felt like I was at home. Buildings in the city of Kurashiki and its sceneries were extremely similar to my hometown, the city of Jinhae, where I spent my childhood. From there, I had culture and spatial shock. The image I had thought it my home was actually in foreign country. That means something went wrong. Something was really wrong to me. So after 14 years at Mr. Dong-moon's office and learned all practical work skills, in 1986, I hung out my shingle. I named my office Archium and started my own works. At that time, I came out of big umbrella. It was like I had to stand alone. I was just busy with the matter of how to survive as an architect. So, the shock I had in the city of Kurashiki, I put them aside for a while. And I was really worried about to survive as an architect and what service to provide. They were in my mind. And in the meantime, Korea hosted major world event in 1988. Seoul Olympics was held. The following 1989, the year became very important to me. It was initiated by the Seoul Olympics in 1988. There was an exhibition in Japan to view Korean architecture's potential. Architecture exhibition called the Gallery Ma invited 3 young Korean architects and held exhibition. We 3 knew one another by names, but no personal exchanges. The curator at the exhibition had an idea to hold the 3 of us. It was called Notion of Madan. The event was combining exhibition and symposium. Not only at the exhibition, but also in symposium from Japanese architects and critics, I was asked a lot of questions about the identity of my architect's style. And then the shock in the city of Kurashiki I had re-emerged in my mind. I began to think of what kind of architecture I was doing and why I was doing. After all exhibitions, and I came back to Korea, I feel like unless I change my architecture paradigm and what I learned at the university and the workplaces, I would not be able to pursue my architectural style. This could not be done by me alone, so I formed a group of friends who shared the same idea with me. On 3rd of April, we were like people in 30s and 40s, so we named 4-3 group. What we did was we revised our traditions and history of modern architectures we knew, and it's supporting architectural theories from the scratch. Though we learned at the university, but we revised. To revise and go through what we did again, it was like a study group. We helped one another and had a criticizing meeting. We got a chance to organize our thoughts and ideas, and one of them was our forgotten. We didn't really think about it. It was our traditional architecture. We went on to explore them. Here in the picture, we were guided by scholars who majored in traditional architectures for over like 1 night and 2 days. When the night came, I remember we didn't sleep a wink because we discussed fiercely what we saw in the morning and what we will see the next day. Not only for this, and we cannot leave out this one. We traveled to find Western architectures, which were the origin of modern architectures. So twice a year, some of us were professors and we all lectured at the universities. So we used our vacation time, travel to Europe to know more about its architectures. Some said postmodernism, traditional architecture, or romanticism, deconstructionism, or Art Nouveau, and what more? Why secession movement? Why secession movement occur? And we had a time to study how come the result that came out like that. And later, we had a chance for a long journey to visit India, Africa, Latin America, and China. So from there, we collected our experiences, then organized and arranged them. At the end, with the subject of our architecture in that time, 4-3 group had a chance for an exhibition. After that, our 4-3 group activities were clinched, and we went back to where we were and worked hard. I had a chance to work on the Cambodia-related project. I was able to visit Cambodia for several times. The picture now you see, it can be seen about 2 hours away distance by car heading toward the Thailand direction from Siem Reap, where the Angkor Wat locates. The scenery is shown 2 hours. The plain appeared endlessly. We can see double crops and 3 crops everywhere. This is what we see in plain. What I felt in here was the concept of the space. I mean, the dichotomy. It divides exactly blue and green. The sense of the space I felt on that plane in Europe, in America, and in China, they must be dichotomous. That was what I had in my mind. So I think this can be very special for us because we were born in here, and so things like this every day. It is natural for us, not being familiar with exactly divided spaces. What's so special is that the plane, when it comes to divided spaces, the architectures, it is destined to stand against the nature. Our traditional architecture method that harmonizes with the nature, it is not really a form or a shape. It is a matter of how to fit in. We don't say build our architecture. We would rather say place our architecture on it. I think this explains why. What I wondered was, in that space, same space, how the blue color comes so naturally with the architecture. I mean, how to put them all in same space. To understand this more logically, as you see, the colored picture is by the satellite. From here, Korean Peninsula has its geological characteristics. 70% of the land is covered by mountains, when the remaining 30% is a plain land. it is very mountainous terrain. They are not that high like Alps or Himalaya. They are just less than 1,000 meters above the sea level. Small mountains come together, create balance, and connected one another. To take a look at our old map of Korea, we can see that a chain of mountains that were drawn in lines. The terrain of this mountain and the high and low of the ridges and the land filled by the valleys, they are well described in here. Let's suppose that the map is created for the way to understand the land. Well, this is not measured by geometry, but done by our experienced feelings. Our map is expressed by physically experienced feelings. So, based on this, typical architecture for Korea appear to be like this in the picture. So, as I said before, I have been concerning that how to translate the way to create scenery and positioning of the architecture, all of those kind of things by the modern architecture. Beginning of modern architecture is based on 5 rules set by Corbusier. To see the picture on the right shows Korea's typical traditional wooden structure. It sets pillars and protection structures and places roof on it. I think creating space by a partition wall inside and its architectural theories are very similar with what Domino says about the principles of modern architecture. From the 5 rules above, only roof garden is not mentioned. Other 4 rules are basically the same. Pilotis next to horizontally long window and a very light wall. Things like that were already done by our architecture. So I'm trying to call it aged modernism. Retro modernism. In order to do that, all I could do, our tradition, based on our tradition, how the modern architecture should define itself, that must be concerned. My favorite, the traditional architecture, the one I like the most, is now you see on the screen. That shape. This is school in our traditional times, and its name is Byungsan-so-won. Due to Hallyu, the Korean wave, it must have been introduced. And I think some of you may notice this. I wish to call this openness. It is openness because it is opened. Although this space is not very large, we can never limit the size. This creates a sense of space like that. It is not like artificially created. It just opened it and created more. It doesn't have to be traditional method. It doesn't have to be traditional architecture. Our modern architecture can do things like that and have a potential to do this. So we could create our architectures. So rather than me being a Korean architect and do something great, but as a one of Korean architects, what I aim to make my architecture, I wish to recreate by the modern feelings. So probably if I had a chance to introduce all of my past works, I want that chance to be able to show my architectural tries to all of you. Well, this is it. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for your nice talk. We are very happy to have you participating. We are also very happy that we have Danny, our interpreter, our translator today with us. We hope it works. So our audience will have a live translation. Thanks, Danny. So we will have a very short interview. My first question is, which other passions have influenced you as an architect? Actually, you thought of becoming an artist and you decided to be an architect. Which other passions have influenced you as an architect?
Now I am architect. Artist and architect, there are not many differences. Whatever I became, what that makes me focused, that kind of thing style, that makes me focused and concentrated. And to draw something and to make something by pen or by brush, to draw something, they're basically saying, I don't think I made a big change.
And during your talk, you mentioned how was Seoul at the time you were born, and how was the city 10 years later. What changes in South Korea and its architecture make you proud?
As Mr. Cho Byung-soo said before, Mr. Cho and I have a generation gap between us. Me senior, Mr. Cho is like junior. I want my young artist for us, tradition is like very important for us. For young people, traditional can be like a target. We get out the complex from the Western architecture and we build our own. That is what I think.
That sounds great. I would like to discuss our time is limited, so I would like to ask Cho to join our conversation we can have a roundtable discussion all together. Okay.
Hi.
Nice to see you again.
Again, yes.
There is one very important question for us. For people who have never been to South Korea, like our team, what do you think we would learn from Korean architecture culture? Maybe Cho, you want to go first?
Definitely, if you are looking for something from traditional Korean architecture, maybe I would say sustainability found through horizontality. Traditional architecture in Korea is always one-story buildings, so plan was always important. Plan, site plan. Architectural forms were not as important, but the plan, site plan, how you deal with the landscape, not only the immediate surroundings, but also the mountains far away. You just make architecture with all the backgrounds of all surroundings, like 10 kilometers, sometimes 100 kilometers away mountains. So try to find energies through these mountains. And so it be the best thing for young people from Western countries, I guess.
And Kim, what do you think we can learn from Korean architecture culture?
Come to Korea, and modern architecture, there's not much, but if you take a look at our traditional architecture, Korean traditional architecture is that connects the human and nature. So Korean architecture is not just a building, it's to view outside from the inside. It is not to view the building from the outside, but you see outside from inside. That's what I think.
That's nice. Cho, what do you mentioned before what you learned not only from the architecture but from the culture? What do you think, like for example, Germans or the Americans can learn from the Korean culture?
Well, I thought always there is more similarities between Korean traditional and architecture or social kind of attitude and the American agricultural heritage with really diligently working, humble way of using materials and livings. And I find some similarities definitely, but most of these come from practicalities in US, but in Korea, for example, not only practicalities, but also strongly influenced by Confucianism, starting with the Confucius school in China 500 years BC by the person Confucius, which was about the period Socrates lived in Western countries. And in Confucius teachings, one of the important teachings is, for example, like making more than enough is worse than making a little less. So that's the kind of philosophy that strongly influenced the Korean culture last about 600 years, I believe.
Mm.
And German, I lived in Germany only 1 year, and I went to school in Switzerland 1 semester. But as I said earlier, like a precise, very accurate kind of way of making, and
Yeah.
and making things more permanently really different than in Korean ways, living with the nature and flowing with the nature, and architecture also flow with the nature. And as most of things in nature, architecture is not supposed to be permanent, but as one that changes and adapts to nature. So each culture definitely just guides architecture in different directions.
It's very nice to have you both participating and having the opportunity to get to know what has influenced you. You both have a large portfolio. What do you have a question here for both of you? What do you consider your biggest achievement after decades of practicing architecture? Maybe Kim, you want to go first with this question?
Much achievement. I think what I've done before, I wrote 5 books because architecture is a creativity, but we create the place where people live. So I think it's very hard to maintain the thought. I see my buildings being destroyed. So when I make how I thought and writing 5 books, that's very meaningful to me. And that's what I think.
That's very nice. Joe, what do you think is your biggest achievement?
Okay, I thought Mr. Kim's answer was very interesting because I didn't know he wrote 5 books. I have only one of his books, but I was so fascinated by the book, and I could definitely read his intention behind. So it's a humble, small book, but it was really, really beautiful, meaningful. It was great. For me, I think, I guess if someone asks a question, maybe after being educated in US and practiced and teaching around the world, I guess, I hope I can bridge somewhat the contemporary culture to our traditional values. Not all the architecture, or not all the traditional architecture, but with contemporary kind of traditional values we have in ourselves and our societies. So what I really believe that strongly we have Korean societies is respecting nature, way of sustainable living, not only with buildings, but with the neighbors and surroundings and societies in overall culture. Still, over the Korean society in Korea, that I hope I can somewhat find some things from the Korean traditional architecture and art and literature philosophies. I want to test and see how I can connect that to contemporary lifestyles of Korea, which is strongly shaped by Western culture. The use of time and use of financing systems and medias, but still with the values we have today that I will help just to keep and try to tap in architecture and architecture in Korea today.
So, do you have any question for Kim? As you mentioned, he's one of your most respected architects.
What is your favorite building in overall that I would like to ask? Because his building is so beautiful and everything that he built not only in Korea but also like Tibet and
Cambodia.
And so I'd like to ask just one of his favorite building and why, and what is most important in the building.
Okay.
I built 100 buildings, more than 100. The one that stays in my mind the most is I built the one in Himalaya mountain. Because in Himalaya, the material that I can find and there, and I built with its people. That stays the most in my mind. Going over the mountains, I've been living Indiana Jones-like life.
네, 저도 그 건물 보고 꼭 가보고 싶었던 건물입니다. 그리고 선생님한테 그 건물 만든 이야기도 나중에 좀 듣고 싶고요.
그것도 책으로 하나 썼죠.
I wrote a book about that too.
I said I really like to visit the building someday.
Yeah. Which is the audience also invited?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
There's one question from the audience regarding yes, of course, advice. Starting your own business. What advice will you give young architects that want to start their own business? So maybe you want to go first with a short answer?
Okay. When I was young and when I was ready to open my practice, I read a small essay written by Frank Gehry's book. So don't complain about the size of the projects or budget of the projects. Whatever you get, like someone's garage door is a fantastic project. So start with it and just do your best. And if you can afford it, try to experiment with it. That's my advice.
So nice advice. Thank you. Kim, what will be your advice?
When I hung out my shingle, I want to share my advice. Friends said to me, hold on 3 years. If you hold on 3 years, then you can survive. But unfortunately, 3 years, I couldn't do many works. I just survived. But the people I met in the 3 years, they started to grow my work. I didn't expect to start very well at first. At first, you stay low and try to find a way not to disappear. That's the story I'd like to share.
That's a very nice advice. So survive 3 years. It's just, a pleasure to have you both participate in. Maybe one last question for you. It would be, what do you enjoy the most of your everyday life? What, after decades of architecture, you are still waking up early, going to the office and working hard. What is that? What do you enjoy the most? Maybe Cho, you want to go first?
Oh, okay.
Or, yeah.
I really like the time when I get up. I usually get up early in the morning, and I'm kind of early bird person. And so I have like 2 hours my own, very quiet. I do sketches or thinkings, reading books. So I really like the time, but I like more after work, about 7 p.m. I don't usually work very late. About 6 or 7, I go home, and on the way out, stop by, bar and drink a glass of wine or a glass of soju and relax. And that's my most fun part of each day. Yeah.
That sounds great. Kim,
Yeah.
what about you?
In my everyday life, what I enjoy the most is in the morning, go to bathroom. It was my own space only. Get away from other families. My own time, my own space. Just stay there and do nothing. And think. And the thought. And I think everything. That is very happy and important time for me.
That's very nice. Kim, Cho, we are very honored that we had you participate in. We are very pleased time, and also thank you your team for helping us coordinating everything. That was a huge help. Thanks, of course, to our partners, Jung, Mosa, and Hefele, who are also working in Korea, and they were very excited about this. It has been a huge pleasure. I wish we could go now to a bar, like Joe mentioned, and enjoy a cup of wine and have a relaxed conversation. Maybe we can do that after this strange time with COVID. It was a pleasure. Thank you a lot, and have a nice evening in Korea and for the rest of the world, like Germany. Have a nice day. It was a pleasure. Thank you a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.